For the first time since the break with Rome, mutual political interest renewed semi-official diplomatic relations between the English court and the Holy See during the 1630s. This informal dialogue resulted from the 1625 marriage of King Charles I to the Catholic Henrietta Maria, Pope Urban VIII's goddaughter. In the Papal Curia de Barberini, the royal union was seen as an opportunity to ease the persecution of Catholics in England and to convince the monarch to convert himself. The first years of marriage, however, saw a series of personal and political tensions between the king and his consort. This was to change after the death of the Duke of Buckingham and the birth of Prince Charles in 1630. The Queen managed not only to establish a loving relationship with her husband, but also to enhance her position at court in order to act as advocate for the English followers of her own religious faith. The situation was now favorable to the papal cause. The Vice-Chancellor of the Holy Roman Church and Cardinal Protector of England, Francesco Barberini, took the chance to put in practice the plans that his uncle, Pope Urban VIII, had envisioned since the previous decade. In 1634, an unofficial emissary was dispatched to England with the purpose of testing the waters in preparation for the arrival of a fully accredited diplomatic delegate to Henrietta Maria. His name was Gregorio Panzani, and following his explorative mission, two envoys separately acted as papal mediators at the Queen's court, George Cohn and Carlo Rossetti. They worked to ensure the opening of an official diplomatic channel between London and Rome until 1641. Throughout this period, Urban VIII, members of his family, and the aforementioned agents in England regarded gifts as useful devices to strengthen their relation with the sovereigns. So, forming a crucial part of papal diplomacy, several artworks were selected in Rome. Cardinal Francesco's correspondence, as well as inventories of both the Stuart and Barberini art collections, provide the main documentary evidence for this gift-giving activity. As yet, scholars have exploited these rich sets of textual sources in a fragmentary manner, only in order to investigate individual donations performed during Panzani's and Cohn's agencies, while later cases have yet to be scrutinized and understood within a larger framework. Moreover, a comprehensive catalogue of these artworks received through these interactions is still needed. Today, I will examine the selection and reception of all the paintings and drawings coming from Rome and given to the sovereigns between 1635 and 1640 in order to supply a more nuanced understanding of King Charles I and Henrietta Maria's expectations and tastes. Furthermore, I will seek to provide a broader picture of how this phenomenon impacted the patronage and collecting habits of the monarch and his royal consort. So, the gift of a group of early 16th century Italian artworks to the Queen by Cardinal Francesco Barberini is the most well-known donation that occurred in this context. Arriving in England in January 1636, these objects were delivered to Henrietta Maria by the first papal agent, Gregorio Panzani. The offering included 3 cartoons representing Putti scenes ascribed to Giulio Romano and 7 paintings, mostly portraits, then believed to be by the hands of Leonardo da Vinci, Giorgione, Garofalo, Andrea del Sarto, Parmigianino, and Pordenone. Previous scholarly investigation identified some of these gifts with artworks attributed to different authors, today that are now preserved in the Royal Collection and in the Devonshire Collection. The presents were the result of a prolonged correspondence started the previous year. A few days after his arrival at court, Gregorio Panzani reported some unexpected news to Rome. Father Robert Philip, the Queen's confessor, had told the papal agent that the king was waiting for some paintings from Rome. The issue had not been a matter of discussion during the preliminary negotiations that led to the papal mission to the Stuart court. However, knowing that the fulfillment of these wishes could attract Charles I's attention, Francesco Barberini was keen to respond to the request. In January 1635, he wrote to Panzani that, for as much as any direct contact between the Roman Apostolic Curia and a Protestant ruler was not conceivable, he could dispatch gifts to the monarch using Henrietta Maria as cover. Always scrupulous in the calculation of his gifts, the cardinal now required guidance about both the king's and the queen's preferences. However, Urban VIII's delegate at court was no such connoisseur, as he spoke no English, was fluent in French, and he had not intimate relations with the royal couple. Therefore, he could only get second-hand information from his direct contacts. As stated by the dispatches sent to the cardinal between June and July 1635, Henrietta Maria's response was vague. According to an account given to Panzani by Father Philip, it was enough for the painting, she argued, to be good ones, no matter whether they were modern or old. Much more useful was the evidence about Charles I's predilections, which the emissary gathered through the help of other trusted mediators, such as the Catholic courtier and art agent Walter Montague. Following their advice, Panzani informed his superior that all pictures would be preferred because of their rarity, while also reporting that the ruler was interested in the purchase of some first-rate pictures from the Ludovisi collection in Rome, especially those by Raphael, Correggio, Titian, and Leonardo. Therefore, by choosing the most appropriate pictures formally addressed to the Queen but ostensibly meant for Charles I, Francesco Barberini modulated his selection by considering a suggested preference for some of the most praised Renaissance masters. However, obtaining such works was extremely difficult, even for a pope's nephew who had the riches of Rome at his disposal. Moreover, time was not on the sender's side. On the one hand, the recipient had already been waiting for the present for 6 months. On the other one, Panzani was near to concluding an agreement on the status of his prospective substitute at court. The cardinal knew that the delivery of the long-awaited pictures could contribute to softening the king's attitude towards such a difficult matter. The task should be fulfilled as fast as possible. Hence, Francesco Barberini opted for 2 paintings from his own collection, while also involving people from his entourage, such as Gian Lorenzo Bernini, in the quick acquisition of the rest of the pictures available on the Roman market. The gifts were finally dispatched in late July 1635, and once they had arrived at their destination, they fortunately obtained, at least partially, the recipient's approval. As stated by Panzani, Henrietta Maria and Charles I especially liked those pictures believed to be by Leonardo and Andrea del Sarto. Also, Giulio Romano's drawings were particularly appreciated, and just a few weeks later, the king ordered his servants to remove them from the queen's residence. He wanted to use the cartoons for the production of tapestries. We do not know whether this idea was even put into practice. Even if Barberini shared the king's passion for tapestries, and I just want to point out that the cardinal tried to acquire some mortlake pieces in 1636, no mention about the project has been found in the letters written by Panzani to his superior during the following period. Clearly, other concerns were of immediate importance. The comments on the paintings given by the cardinal were not entirely positive. In fact, Panzani commented on the Queen's disappointment when none of the pictures received from Rome appeared to be devotional. In the meantime, Barberini had urged the diplomat to find out whether the works by the Carracci were as esteemed at the Stuart court as they were in Italy. So the envoy called on the Tuscan painter Orazio Gentileschi for guidance, and following their meeting, he reported that Annibale Carracci would be acceptable because none of his works were represented in the royal collection. Provided with both more detailed information about the king's preferences and feedback on the previous donation, Urban VIII's nephew was now ready to dispatch a new gift. In July 1636, George Cohn, a Scot from the Cardinal's inner circle, reached England with a task to take over from Panzani as new papal agent, bringing a religious painting by Annibale Carracci meant for the Queen. The gift depicted the martyrdom of Saint Catherine of Alexandria and had been acquired by Francesco Barberini from Cardinal del Monte's heirs in the late 1620s. Previous studies have identified this artwork from with an oil on canvas variously ascribed to Domenichino Annibale Carracci or Innocenzo Tacconi. Now conserved in the Fondazione Longhi in Florence, the painting was formerly owned by the Duke of Sutherland. This provenance might corroborate this proposal. However, some doubts arise when it comes to the fact that although dimension and number of figures match the information given by the Barberini inventories, and as you can view in the slide, the catalogue draft on the occasion of the sale of Charles I's goods describe it as Saint Catherine being touched on a single wheel by Carrats. As you can see, the Longhi canvas show two wheels. Therefore, it seems likely that this is not the present dispatched from Rome in 1636. But while the recognition of Annibale's works called for further investigation, its reception appears easier to assess. As stated by Cohn, Henrietta Maria was pleased with such a devotional gift, while also reporting that the Queen told me that she did not know how to defend herself from the king's interest in the Saint Catherine. I moved close to her, and I added that it was necessary to say that the painting had particular indulgences. But the Queen, laughing, told me the king would take it along with all indulgences from Rome. Therefore, Charles I was extremely attracted by the Carraccis. George Cohn and the Barberini couldn't actually know that recent information given by Gentileschi to Panzani was wrong. In fact, as attested by Van der Dort's inventory, the king already had at least one work credited to the Bolognese master among his possessions. This painting had been purchased from the Gonzaga collection. It depicted the agony in the garden, and it was a version on stone derived from an original composition now attributed to Annibale Carracci's cousin Ludovico. During the late 1630s, other paintings attributed to the Carracci were recorded by the documents in Charles I's collection of art, such as a Madonna by Annibale, Diana and Action, and a Mary Magdalene. Beside these works and the Saint Catherine dispatched in 1636, the Commonwealth sale inventories provide evidence for the increasing interest in works ascribed to members of that Bolognese family of painters. By 1649, 3 further Carracci pictures joined the royal collection. In my opinion, it is possible that Cardinal Barberini's offering gave a consistent contribution to this growing consideration. The Barberini correspondence also shows how the monarchs were attracted by another Italian painter active during the second half of the Cinquecento and the early Seicento, Federico Barocci. I'm sorry because probably I forgot a slide, but at the request of Henrietta Maria, George Cohn brought to the Somerset house 2 little paintings that a servant had noticed in the agent's residence in March 1637. These pictures were part of the personal belongings of the diplomat, and they had been attributed to Barocci by Cassiano dal Pozzo. The correspondence does not make any reference to their subject matters. Nevertheless, the curiosity shown by Charles I's consort might imply that they feature religious iconography. Once the pictures were finally delivered to court, they gained the approval of both the sovereigns. The papal agent wanted to give them 1 each, but I quote, "The king immediately said that they both must stay in the same place. The queen stated that she would place them in her cabinet room, but for the moment the king has taken them into custody, and he has shown them to all the gentlemen and ladies who arrived at the palace." Unfortunately, Cohn's letters do not offer additional information useful to identify these pictures. Tracing their later destination also appears to be a challenging task, since none of the Stuart inventories mention any attribution to Federico Barocci. So up until this point, the present investigation has scrutinized presents including only works attributed to old Italian masters. The majority of them were already in the possession of the donors, and until the departure of the last papal agent to the Stuart court, the aristocrat Carlo Rossetti, they were seen as appropriated devices to satisfy the addressee's wishes. However, an abundance of evidence, such as the well-known commissions of both Bernini's portrait bust of Charles I and Guido Reni's Bacchus and Ariadne, show that the artistic interest of the royal couple went far beyond the works executed by Italian artists of past generations. This is also confirmed by the examination of true donation which occurred through Anglo-Roman diplomatic relations. Easier to know whether Seicento art would be appreciated by the king. Cardinal Barberini had written to Panzani citing some important contemporary painters in June 1635, such as Pietro da Cortona, Domenichino, Lanfranco, Poussin, Reni, Ribera, Albani, and Guercino. 1 month later, the agent replied to his superior. On the one hand, he argued, Reni's pictures were particularly esteemed, while on the other hand, he followed Orazio Gentileschi's recommendations in ensuring that also works by Lanfranco and Ribera would be good choices, since the monarch, I quote, has no works by these as he has by the other famous painters. As I pointed out before, Gentileschi was wrong in stating that Carracci was not represented in royal collection. Probably, he was not the best advisor in those circumstances. From the list of a possible artists submitted by the Cardinal, he singled out the only ones that were not currently active in Rome. Thanks to his contacts, in fact, he was definitely better informed about the Neapolitan artistic environment, where Lanfranco and Ribera, as well as her daughter Artemisia, had achieved great success. The Barberini and their diplomatic agents followed this suggestion only partially. In February 1636, George Cohn presented the king with a picture by Sermonetta and the queen by a copy of Guido Reni's St. Michael. The latter was a gift from the Pope's brother and protector of the Capuchins, Antonio Barberini. Regarding its reception, it is interesting to notice that the papal delegate described how Charles recognized at once that the St. Michael was of the school of Guido Reni, and at first hesitated whether it were not by his own hand, but then concluded absolutely that it was not, but praised it excessively nonetheless. The sources doesn't mention any comments by the Queen, but it is highly probable that the gift stimulated her to meditate on Reni's style. One month later, she commissioned, in fact, Cardinal Barberini with a painting by Guido Reni for a bedchamber at Greenwich. That painting was the Bacchus and Ariadne. Also during the English sojourn of the last papal agent, Carlo Rossetti, an offering by a Seicento Italian painter is reported by the manuscripts. Besides giving a lost nativity by Titian to Henrietta Maria in 1640, 1 year before, in October 1639, the delegate had offered a picture by Francesco Albani to Charles I. The recipient undoubtedly cherished the gift, since, as stated by Carlo Cesare Malvasia in his Felsina Pittrice, the monarch was indeed eager to have Albani at his court, but he failed to attract the artist. According to Rossetti, I translated and quote, the king extremely liked it because he had known by Albani and he desired some. Unfortunately, neither the Barberini correspondence nor the inventory of the cardinal provide any information useful in determining the provenance and subject matter of this work. Nevertheless, other textual sources, such as the letters written in the late 1630s by Basil Fielding, ambassador in Venice and art dealer, seem to suggest a potential delay to this delivery. In fact, in February 1639, Fielding related to the Marquis of Hamilton that, I quote, "At Bologna I saw 2 pictures which will be finished this next summer. The one by Guido Reno, the other by Albano, intended either for the king or queen. Perhaps this could be the painting given to Charles I the following autumn." Referring to the subject matter, a possible indication is provided by the Stuart inventories. The catalogue of the sale of the king's goods registered only a single painting attributed to Albani, a Bacchus, Venus, and Ceres, now lost or unidentified. Once again, a new inquiry is needed for further clarification. Might the painting recorded in the inventory be the gift delivered by Rossetti? We actually now don't know, but in conclusion, as we have seen, the Barberini gift-giving activity gave a consistent contribution to the construction of that pantheon of Italian arts that was dreamed up by Charles I and his consort. The results of this correspondence surely went far beyond the depiction given by Panzani and Gentileschi. Thank you.